Even in a given moment, I can take on at least 4 different roles in any given context, and I can shift very, very quickly. They're the same 4 roles that are in every epic story. These roles are up for grabs. Just know you're playing some role somewhere, somehow. And if I'm not clear and awake to the role that I'm playing, I'm not playing the role's playing me. Wake up to the reality you're in and just acknowledge it neutrally. Curiously, if I was playing a role, what might it be? And then ask yourself, is this the role I actually want to play, or that my future self will have wanted me to play? If it's easy, the path you're taking, you think you're going to transform, that's not transformation. That's drifting. And no one drifts to greatness. We need compression. We need hard things to overcome in order to become someone new. And if we don't, we stay asleep and we stay in our roles and nothing changes. As humans, we prefer the path of least resistance. We crave convenience, the payoff without the price. But when our lives revolve around comfort, it doesn't deliver. Living in perpetual comfort leaves us weak and asleep. This podcast is an invitation to flip that script, to choose the unlikely path, to get the life you really want through voluntary discomfort. This is Strong and Awake. I'm Dane Sanders. Mitch.
Yes, sir.
We got to talk about pickleball.
Oh, okay. You just lost half of the audience. No.
Or I just doubled our audience. I can't tell what it is. Depends. But I'll tell you this. I have been taking on this idea of pickleball. And like many, when I first heard of pickleball, I thought it was basically a poor man's tennis game, or tennis for lazy people or old people. And it turns out that pickle is actually turned into, I think, a pretty radical competitive sport. And I've decided this summer, for giggles, to, in my move back to Southern California, hanging out with my friends, some are young, like in their 20s, some are older, in their 60s even. But in between 20s and 60s, there are some really, really competitive athletes playing this sport, which I thought was just a game before, and it is just a game, like all sports are. But the folks who take it seriously, they're playing like it's real. And I'm realizing they're really good at this thing. So I thought, I like choosing hard things. Why don't I learn how to play pickle this summer? And I've actually gotten kind of geeked out about it. Of course, I have my paddle and I have my shoes and so on, but I also have like a bucket of a rolling bucket that like coaches have on pickleball courts. I have 120 pickleballs that I went out and purchased. I have a ball picker upper, like this big tube thing that you just go pop, 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 and kind of fills it up, and you're able to do it. And I've been so excited. Like, this is great. I'm going to really take this on seriously. But then I went ahead and thought, who's the best pickleball player I know? And there's 2 of them that come to mind that I'm really close with. And one of them, his name is Preston. And Preston is, I think, 22, 23. He's a fantastic athlete. He probably will play professional pickleball. He could arguably play like professional volleyball. That's what he plays in college. He's still in college now. And last night I had a lesson with him. And in this lesson, I show up and I am double his age. And I used to be a serious athlete and volleyball player. And I think I have some sense of certain things. And it became really evident really quickly that I had to make some decisions about how I was going to relate with my friend Preston. He's actually the son of another dear friend, a guy I went to college with. So he calls me Mr. Sanders. He doesn't even call me by my first name. And it's a funny phenomenon. So I'm walking into the scene, and you could imagine I have options available to me. One is I could be the guy, I coach people for a living. I know a lot about how coaching works and how you set up scenes and invite people to get into experiential embodied learning, not just kind of cognitive passing of information back and forth, and how critical, good form and reps are, and paying attention to the physical body as you're playing. So I'm learning, all these things, and I'm thinking, I could actually help this guy coach me. And that's actually how I started the conversation. I was like, I'm going to coach you coaching me, kind of thing. And pretty quickly he was like,
humble disposition.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. Go. And then I realized how foolish that was. That when I took on that role, I actually was clogging up the role I wanted him to take on with me. I wanted him to be my guide. So I quickly shifted. And I like same person, same context. And all of a sudden I went from one role to another where I went, I'm a beginner. I'm going to pretend I don't know anything. And he clearly knows how to play. He's incredible. And my job is to actually do what he tells me. And that's it. And in that, there were even other roles I could play. Like there was times where he was talking about how he grew up, like he felt bad because his topspin, for example, was so good. He was like, I learned this playing tennis, or I learned this playing ping pong. And I was like, I played a little tennis, but I didn't really play those sports. And I feel like it's such a deficit. And I thought about, I didn't have a dad, and why didn't I have a dad who could teach me these things? And I just felt lower and lower and lower. And I just lost the plot. I was drifting off into a different role again, where I was no longer this guy who was going for it to become a pickleball player, learning. I actually became a bit of a victim and was just kind of lost in my head to like, well, why didn't I have these things? And in that, as we're playing, there's even moments where, I'd hit a bad shot and he'd be like sharing back to me, almost like sympathy, like, it's okay, man, it's okay. And I'm like, I don't like how that feels. Like I didn't actually like that he was swooping in to try to make me feel better. What I was interested in was actually getting better at the game. So 2 hours later, we're done our lesson. And now 12 hours later, I've been reflecting on this thing. And I realized how aligned this is with something that we talk about all the time at Men and Women of Discomfort. And that is all the different roles that we can play in life. That even in a given moment, I can take on at least 4 different roles in any given context, and I can shift very, very quickly. And if I'm not clear and awake to the role that I'm playing, I'm not playing the role's playing me. And it is really not resourceful to get played like that. And of course, these ideas, they came first introduced to me. I had a chance to work with a guy named Donald Miller for a number of years, being a corporate trainer for his Story brand business and helping people understand how story works and how they can apply that to their business. And really fun conversations over the years with Don and getting an understanding of how story works, and even studying under other guys like Matthew Dix and his storytelling principles and how to tell great stories and to understand how powerful a story can be. But in all these contexts, as you get to know story, what I discovered, especially through Don, is these 4 roles that I was playing pickleball are the same 4 roles that I could play all the time. And they're the same 4 roles that are in every epic story that's ever been told. That these roles, just like a cast of characters on a stage or in a movie or in a book that we're reading, these are roles, or even in our family of origin, we play roles. These roles are up for grabs. That we actually, as fully functioning human beings, have a capacity to choose our role if we're mindful to it, if we're aware that the roles exist, and if we're aware that sometimes they're running us more than we're running them. And when we grab them, we gain agency, and it's a powerful, powerful mechanism. When we choose a role, it's a powerful mechanism to kind of grab the handles on our lives. So I would like to talk about choosing your role today.
What a great preamble. And there was so much in that. Before we get too deep in the episode, I'd love to talk about what these kind of archetypical roles are.
Yep.
But I love, and I want to call out one thing that you said is that we can switch between these roles.
Yes.
And part of kind of these anchors in this anchor series is one, kind of being awake and aware of these things and these moments in our lives when things like this happen, when we notice that we're playing these roles because we've identified them, we've reflected on it and seen when we've played those in the past or when others have played those in the past for us. And I think that unlike, maybe stories have like a little bit of a longer arc. You can see this transformation of this individual, whether that's the villain or the hero, whatnot, over time. And one of the things that we get to do is if we're aware of these things and we're awake and we have the strength to lean in, like it doesn't have to take a crazy long time to switch between these different roles. Like it's a huge advantage. And what I'm hoping that this conversation produces is that awareness and some resources to be able to kind of lean in and more quickly identify and shift those roles that we're playing in these moments and in these brief, even seconds and decisions that we're making.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. What comes to mind as soon as you say that is, first let me talk about the different roles. Yeah. And then let me give you an example of kind of how powerful and potent a shift can be. This isn't my story, but it's a story that I know a number of listeners have been adjacent to or have experienced themselves, and I think they'll get it. And I think they can begin to extrapolate that and apply it to their own lives even more richly. So first, the 4 roles. So in almost, everyone knows from Joseph Campbell's Hero with 1,000 Faces and Hero on a Journey and or on a Mission rather. Don Miller wrote a book like that, or called that. And a lot of folks have been exposed to the idea of the hero's journey. And the hero's journey is this notion that someone starts in a state of being actually not a hero. They start in the state of being a victim. And the first role that we all are born into, we don't choose our family, we don't choose our circumstances, even the age that we're born in. We're victims to whatever the fates have dealt. Here we are. And this is reality. Here I am. I'm a 54-year-old man talking to the microphone to my friend Mitch in a room with lights and listening to a plane overhead. I grew up without a dad. My friend Tim Kruger died of stomach cancer. I also had a chance to go to college. I have food in my fridge and a roof over my head. There's so many phenomenon going on that can all give me clues as to which role I'm playing. But oftentimes when I drift into kind of falling asleep, I tend to drift to this role of victim. And victim is just where I kind of get I don't like my job maybe, or I don't like how somebody treated me, or I don't like what she really meant when she said that. Whatever it is, some kind of trigger or clue puts me in a state or a status in my own heart and mind of being a victim. And that's just the starting point. That's, every great story, Luke Skywalker started as a victim until he met somebody. And in one movie, it's Obi-Wan Kenobi. In another movie, it's Yoda. But in all contexts, the hero's journey, which is all that story really is somebody was in a bad place. And then they wanted to get to a good place. And they needed a guide to get them there. And that's the second role, is when a victim can find a guide who's been there and done that and has some authority and also some empathy for the person who is going through their journey, and can, without doing the journey for them, just kind of map a path, give the clues, invite them forward, call them up. The guide can actually help the victim transform into the third role, which is the hero. And this is profound. When a victim can transform into a hero, especially when they're helped by a guide, it is a magical story. And we've seen that story told over and over and over again. Almost every great story includes those 3 characters. But there's also a 4th character. And the 4th character is usually some cleverly disguised villain. And one of my favorite disguises that villains wear is the role of rescuer. The role of rescuer is so conniving, so subversive, because the rescuer often looks like a guide, but actually is competing with the hero for that role. They want to still be the hero of the story. They want to be the big deal. The truth is, the guide in the story is actually a bit part. They don't transform at all in the course of any story. Obi-Wan Kenobi didn't transform. Yoda didn't transform. It was Luke Skywalker that transformed. And they played the role of, I'm going to guide, but not be relevant, not be important. I'm going to actually create space for you to have your day, and you're going to win the day. But villains, or the rescuer villain, what they do is they appear to be offering advice or input or help, but they want to swoop in and be the reason why the victim became the hero. So those are the 4 primary roles, and those are the roles that I could play last night at Pickleball, or I could experience on any given day. And if I'm conscious to it, I can step into from victim status to hero status, or from, even if I'm tempted to want to compete as a rescuer, I can actually upgrade rescuer to guide. But the truth is, we want to be in a position where we're either creating hero energy or guide energy. We don't want to spend much energy at all in that victim state. It's pretty discouraging. Even though we all are legitimate victims, we want to invite beyond that status. And if we find ourselves swooping in and rescuing people over and over and over again, it's really critical to realize we're actually not helping the people we think we are. we're actually disqualifying them from having a chance to make the leap they really want to make.
I mean, bookmark it, go back, listen to that section. That's going to ground a lot of what we're doing here and talking about, but also that just every time I hear this as a part of our MWOD community, you get to reintroduce these ideas, these anchors every round, and there's just so much gold every time. I can read all the books, I can hear them over and over, but I'm interpreting my experiences leaning into these things and even recent moments in my life through this lens. And
like what? Give us an example. What's a moment that comes to mind for you?
Well, I was actually to state one that might not be as obvious and follow track with me here. I was recently talking to my dad who's in town, and he and I both share the same propensity to default to things that have just so much pragmatic value in the world. And one of the ways that surfaces is in our choice of reading. We can tend to, our shelves are full of, business books or nonfiction books. And we were talking about that dynamic and interpreting kind of this conversation or interpreting that through this lens. I realized that I am drawn, I often just look for rescuers in the literature that I read. Like I want to just someone just tell me, answer my questions, give me all the knowledge so that I can magically transform without any effort on my side. And not to say that, business or self-help or whatever books aren't, are bad, because they're not. But I don't lean into fiction as much, which I see as playing more of a guide role. It's an invitation into a story, someone that's showing and not telling. And it's an actual opportunity to live in that for a moment, experience that. And then I get to, through my own actions, through my own interpretation, through my own understanding, like be transformed and do the work on my own. And so that's like, a kind of abstract example of where this shows up, but that's like a very real one for me right now when I'm realizing, wow, if you're playing a victim, you often attract rescuers, and even not just in people, but even in the things that you consume, even in the things that you're putting in your brain. And in this, trivial story, it's fiction versus nonfiction, but I think that shows up in a whole lot of other places. I'm curious, like, if you have other examples or stories that come to mind for you.
Yeah, one of my favorite examples connects less to my narrative and more to some lore around a pretty remarkable story in the Pacific Northwest here in the United States. So there's a therapist, a psychologist up in the Northwest named Dan Allender. Dan's written a number of books. His best friend actually was a colleague of mine at Westmont College when I used to teach there. I had a chance to hang around with him on a couple of occasions. And he tells this remarkable story about how he does his work. His specialty is actually he works with adults who were sexually molested when they were kids, and they're trying to overcome the trauma that they experienced. And it turned out that Dan himself was a victim in the same way, where he was, as a kid, molested and worked through a lot of stuff and actually became an expert in that field and has a particular modality to help adults navigate healing and recovery in that space. And his method is fascinating to me because he has one goal and he has one rule. And I'm speaking in broad strokes. There's certainly more to it than what I'm suggesting, but it's really helpful and informative relative to this conversation to understand. So he's taking these people who are legitimate victims, right? Like no human in the world would say someone who was molested as a kid was not a victim. There's no question that's true. And in that, he recognizes the state that people were in, and he's inviting them into something new. And his rule is he'll only work with his clients for 1 year, and then they have to stop. And the reason he will only work with clients for 1 year is because he has one goal. And the single goal he has is to take these people who are legitimate victims, like that no one questions. No one's asking them to take responsibility for being victimized. No one's asking them to do anything in that regard. But he is inviting them to give up their victim status, to take off the role of victim and put on a new role. And in his estimation, after decades of work with a lot of different folks, is that if people don't do that in about a year, they probably never will. They probably never will give up that status. And what often people misunderstand about the victim role, because people are like, oftentimes when we talk about this, people are like, well, who would want to be a victim? Of course I want to not be a victim. But there's a huge upside to being a victim, a huge upside. And the huge upside is, if I'm a victim, I'm not responsible for my life. Now, again, I want to emphasize, what we're not suggesting is that anyone who's victimized like that is responsible for being victimized. That's not what we're talking about here. When we say responsible, what we're talking about is, given that reality of what's happened to the victim, what will the victim do then? Like from here forward, not from what happened historically. Are they still going to retain their victim status where they can't do anything because they've been traumatized and that's just the way it is and we're done? Or do they want to do the work where they can put themselves in a position to become someone new? And that's the work that Dan does. And I find that to be profound because it's very much analogous to the notion of moving from victim, even though we all are, and being a victim isn't even bad. Even the folks that they don't get the work done in the year and they stay a victim, it's probably because the trauma is pretty brutal. And they're just, that's just the amount of work that they're up for. And it would be kind of cruel to keep pushing them in the direction or inviting them in the direction where they would change their status when they're really not interested in that. But for those of us who are interested in finding a way out of their victim status into maybe hero status, going to a guide like Dan Allender can be remarkably helpful, especially if that guide is not going to swoop in and try to just make the feelings go away, or just somehow say the right things, or give the right answers. Like, that's not the kind of work that I don't think that Dan does with folks. And I want to suggest that as we consider these four roles, Dan's formula is pretty instructive. I think for us to get clear that if we find ourselves as victims in our lives, if people are listening at home or watching at home, and they're like, I am a victim. I'm a victim to, that old Talking Heads song, like, how did I get here? This notion of like, who's my beautiful wife, and who's that house, and what am I in? Like, how did I get here? Well, here you are is a more important question. And based off of where you're at, this is reality. What do you want to do from here? And can you find the agency to move forward? Can you find the competency to get better in a direction? And can you do it in a way where you feel like you're a part of something that's bigger than you? That's what I encourage folks to look for, because when those three ingredients are in play, people can feel that sense of self-determination as they move forward. And if they can find others to help them in that journey, it is just magical. It's magical to witness. And we get to witness it every single day at Men and Women of Discomfort.
Yeah, and I think there's a certain dignity with acknowledging that you have the capacity to choose this role. And to use our friend Megan's language, there's honor. And it's like exercising that agency in choosing that role is big, and not recognizing that, of course, all of the acknowledgments and caveats about legitimate people that have been victimized, but the path forward and exercising that agency in choosing that role. And I want to zero in on the language there, because choose your role. Like there's no wasted words there, because we have the choice.
Yep.
It's your. So this isn't something externally. It's not just an external guide, an external victim, an external hero, etc. And then role. These are roles that we play, and we can switch in between them, like you said. And again, these are anchors which help kind of anchor us through the whirlwinds and storms, like we've said. So I'm curious, like, how does one go about kind of choosing these roles? I think it's easy to think like, I can kind of choose to have a guide. I can go out and seek a coach or something. But how do we switch between these roles, like in ourselves? And how do we start to take steps towards at least recognizing or defaulting to these more resourceful, helpful roles?
It's interesting. I was distracted for a second as you were asking me that question. I'm going to actually need your help to hear it again, because I'm looking over to my left and I just saw a text message from my daughter and my wife. We're missing our cat right now. Our cat went missing this morning, and we have an indoor cat. It's gone outdoors, we think. And we're just gutted, right? Like we just feel so just gross. That pit in your stomach of like, what does this mean? What could it be? And the stories we're making up. And I couldn't even hear what you were saying a second ago because I just immediately went to like, I hate that we live in a world that missing cats is not good news, and things can go sideways in weird ways, and we don't want that. We're really hopeful. But the question becomes in these kinds of moments like, well, what are we going to do about it? And I was looking over, and what I noticed was my daughter was stepping into this like, hey, I just posted this on Nextdoor, and hey, we lost our cat. We want to, I'm like, oh, I like that. Like there's a sense of like, you're doing something, you're pushing against the force that's taking you in the direction of victim and taking a stand in a certain kind of way. And I see these kinds of opportunities all the time, but they're not always taken. It's just tempting to go, oh, why me, and why this, and why that, and things fall apart. So all that to say, forgive the interlude. Can you state the question again? Because I totally missed it.
That's fine. I think it would. It'd be good to have a take two anyway for me, since I can tend to ramble on. But the essence of the question is, it's easy for us to identify like an external guide, an external victim, something that's a little bit more obvious. It's a little bit harder when it's identifying these shifts and these roles that we play ourselves. So one, how do we begin to identify those things? And then two, how can we begin to kind of recognize that and then take action to kind of push back against those less helpful roles?
Well, one of the reasons why archetypical roles that are pervasive in every story are so helpful is you can't be on stage if you're not playing some role. There's something you're doing. And if these were the only four options available to you at any given moment, you could ask yourself the question, what role am I currently playing? You don't have to be you don't have to be judgmental about it. You don't have to be anything about it. It's just like curious. Like, hey, if these were the only four roles available to me on the stage of life, which role am I playing right now? Am I playing the victim in this circumstance with what I'm dealing with right now? Am I playing the hero if I'm stepping up to something? Do I have an opportunity to be with people in such a way that they feel heard and understood, empathy, and they're being guided with authority, but they don't have to pick the thing that I'm offering them? It's not heavy-handed. It's really just an open-handed. Or do I find myself seeing, because of my experience, something going on in someone's life, and I feel like the best thing I could do is to swoop in and tell them and fix them and dial them in, and all of those things are clues that we are playing a particular role more than another, and we can shift the moment we see it. Now, I want to be a little careful with that, because there's a sense in which, again, in deep drama and trauma, it's not quite as obvious that that's the case, and it might take a lot of discovery and some sifting and some things to kind of bring to the light so that it can get worked through. That said, at least in a micro moment in a given day with more domestic pedestrian kind of realities of victimhood, that shift from, it's usually two paths. It's victim to hero, or it's rescuer to guide. And those are the directions you want to go. But just know you're playing some role somewhere, somehow. And it doesn't take a lot of reflection to realize it right away. Because even as I'm saying these words, I know listeners are going like, gosh, that's me. Like, yep. I'm doing that right now. Because you're human, right? It's not about feeling badly or feeling shame, or it's like, got it. Like every morning I wake up. Oh, and guess what? The cat came home. Oh, I'm so happy. I'm so happy.
This episode is sponsored by Nextdoor. No.
I'm so relieved. Incredible.
Oh, that's awesome.
Anyhow, so I'm really over the moon. I won't go into any more with that. But anyways, you're always playing a role. Tune into yourself. This is the awakeness, right? Wake up to the reality you're in, and just acknowledge it neutrally, curiously. If I was playing a role, what might it be? And then ask yourself, is this the role I actually want to play, or that my future self will have wanted me to play? And usually, this is really critical to understand. I alluded to this earlier. If you find yourself a victim and you feel kind of like stuck, you feel like you're like on the metaphorical couch, laying back, going like, oh, You probably need to get off the stinking couch.
Mm.
There's a sense in which you might be an accomplice to your victim status. And you, because of the responsibility, it takes challenge to get off the couch, metaphorically. It takes something in you to get up. And I think this is some of the rub, right? Is we live in a culture where the messages we're getting all the time, over and over and over again, our whole economy is based on it, is, the core of what we're about at MWOD is when you feel down, when you feel like you're under it, you feel like a victim, here's what you ought to do. Have a donut. Skip the workout. I know you said you were going to get that report done. It's okay. You can get away with not doing it.
Yeah, treat yourself.
Have
a glass of wine, mama.
Yeah, or 2 or 7, Yeah. But at the least, be sure to turn on some crap television and veg out for the next 3 hours. And we're making a joke of it on some level. It's not a joke. It's a tragedy because nobody feels good. Nobody feels better when they're a victim and they decide to make it worse. At the end of it, it's short-term, very fleeting, like eating cotton candy. It might taste good for a second, but you're not going to get nourished by it. And pretty soon you're on the other side of that and you're like, I just feel worse than I felt. And if you've just gotten off the metaphorical couch, which is no small thing, I get that. You might need a guide to get off the couch. You might need a community who's getting off their own couches, who are next to you. And you're like, I want to be like them. People like us do things like this. So Seth Godin. And this is where it gets pretty magical, is you don't have to drift to irresponsibility and victimhood perpetually. You can actually stand up. You can stand now, which is a future anchor we'll talk about later. But this notion of movement, it requires an embodied response to the recognition of what role you're playing. And you have a few options.
I think another indicator too of the role that you're playing, if you're still, hopefully it's obvious what role you're playing, but another indicator would be this kind of like law of attraction. If you victims tend to attract rescuers.
Yes.
Heroes tend to attract guides. It's not my original thought. You've shared that. We've talked a lot about this over the last 2 years.
Well, it's Don Miller's insight. And I think it's critical to understand that we see this with our kids, right? We have 2 kids who graduated from college, 2 kids one's a senior in college, one's going into her freshman year. And as they begin this adulting process, my wife and I are constantly tempted to rescue them, to swoop in, to pay the bill, to get, whatever. And we're in that in-between stage, right? Where we were responsible and now they're becoming responsible for their lives. And it's appropriate, to put the diaper on the kid. But if we're still putting the metaphorical diaper on the kid and they're in college, it's a problem, right? And this is this sense of am I actually helping them? One of the stories I've told before on one of our episodes, but I want to tell it again. The guy who I started MWOD with, my friend Tim Kruger, his son Henry is a remarkable baseball player. And I just got footage from his wife just the other day of him pitching to win the championship for his travel team. And it's just, I love cheering for this kid. But early on, Tim was he was a unique kind of parent. And there was this moment where his son, Henry, I think he struck out or something like that at every at bat. And I came over to Tim's house and I saw Henry in the backyard digging a hole. And I was like, Tim, what's Henry? He's crying. I'm like, what's he doing, man? He's like, well, a good dad, when their kid strikes out the whole game, would take him out for, a milkshake. But a great dad would make him go in the backyard and dig a ditch. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm glad that, Child Protective Services aren't aware of this behavior. And, but of course, you get it, right? There's a sense of no, what he was saying was, sometimes it's going to get harder before it gets better. And that's not bad news. It's actually good news. Because what happens to the kid that learns how to respond to a hard moment with hard work? Well, they actually have the opportunity. It doesn't have to go this way. If he was forced, he wasn't forced, there was agreement. But you understand the point. There's a sense of, and this is controversial. A lot of people think No, this is cruel and mean. And like, no. Choosing the uncomfortable thing in these kinds of moments is what's required if you want to get to a different status. Like, it was not comfortable for Luke Skywalker to join the Rebel Force and become, I wanted to say ninja, but become a Jedi. There's nothing comfortable about that process. But because it's a movie, we think it's like, oh no, it's just like this predetermined destiny. It's like, no. An actual hero's journey looks like it's really hard, and you're probably not going to make it, and you go anyways. Mm-hmm. And I think this is this notion of what we're up to is, if it's easy, the path you're taking, and you think you're going to transform, you probably aren't going to transform. That's not transformation. That's drifting. And no one drifts to greatness. We need compression. We need hard things to overcome in order to become someone new. And that's good news. It's actually, the fact that it's even possible to happen is incredible. What's sad to me is that we've largely forgotten this in our culture. We think that comfort is the ultimate ideal. If I could only just plug myself into a comfort machine for the rest of my life, I'll be good. But you'll get to the end of that life with massive regret. Massive regret. That's not what you do if you want to have satisfaction in this life. Becoming is actually the creative act that is so moving. And that we live in a world that's designed that that actually can happen is remarkable if we take advantage of it. And if we don't, we stay asleep and we stay in our roles and nothing changes.
Well, let's end it on that. I mean, I encourage you, if you're listening, if you're feeling that, like Dane mentioned earlier, that like, oh, that recognition in yourself of those moments, lean into that. Lean in, recognize it. Don't shy away from it. Change your relationship with that.
Maybe even ask for help. Yeah,
exactly.
When we say lean in, we're not just saying like suffer a little longer without construction. Make something from it.
Yeah.
Look to someone in your world that seems to have had similar experiences, but they don't feel stuck like you feel stuck. See if you can get into a conversation. Ask them what they did. If they try to swoop in and do it for you, say, please don't do that. Instead, and give me some instruction on what I need to go do. What's the hard thing I get to go do? And we begin to see how these anchors start playing with each other, right? Getting to choosing your role. And in many ways, choosing your role is the means by which you transform a have to into a get to, which is what we talked about last week. And that practical reality that starts with a recognition, and then we take action. Usually it's looking for a guide. In our context, if you can't find a guide very quickly, I'd encourage you to go to MWOD. We got a lot of people. Like in this context, it's not that any individual is necessarily a guide. It's really more the community is a guide. We have a lot of shared experiences now with a lot of years under our belt where we've discovered a lot of things. And what I can also count on is there's not going to be a lot of rescuing. We'll be with you, though, every step of the way as you account for where your life is and account for the life you want and who you want to become and actually have a path to get there. So I really hope people consider that, but I also hope that people just come back next time, because next time's conversation, again, we're going to get super practical, a little less kind of heady about these things, and get more into what do you actually do, like practically, in order to see this get to happen, to see the role shift happen. And I think it's going to be really, really helpful for folks.
I agree. So join us next week as we dig into this anchor series. And if you're curious to learn more about MWOD, if you want a guide, if you want to get off that metaphorical couch, then just visit mwod.io/apply. We'll see you next week. Thanks, Dane.
Thanks, Mitch. Men and Women of Discomfort is our membership community, and we are open to everyone. But keep in mind, our tagline is, it's probably not for you. If we're wrong about that, or if you want to find out for yourself, you can find us at MWOD.io.